Okay, so I want to welcome everyone to week 14 of xEssentials. Tonight is an exciting presentation. We've been trying to get Mark on for the past 3 years, I think, Mark,
I think
and
so,
always
yeah.
had a conflict or something. So tonight we've got Mark Valentine with mobile props. You've got the floor, Mark.
Thanks, Ed. As the first slide says, this is Mobile Props presentation. My name is Mark Valentine. Just to give you a little preview of what we're going to be going through here is a little bit about on who I am, what is a mobile prop, why I have a mobile prop. I heard somebody about 45 minutes ago say I'm in Canada, it's too cold for mobile props. Well, there may be other uses for them for you even in Canada or cold places. And then we'll get into the meat of the presentation, how to make mobile props. Props from design and lights, power, 5 volt, 12 volt. Don't worry, we're not going to get into an argument tonight. Light control, some example wiring diagrams, some user control as far as network and access, and then some closing thoughts, and hopefully some period for questions. There's a note there at the bottom. This is a higher level presentation. If you already have a working knowledge of X-Lights, Falcon Player, and how a display works in general, you should be able to create your own mobile prop at the end with the appropriate amount of work. The other thing is this is mobile props focused natively in X-Lights and using things that most of us that are familiar with X-Lights are already using. There are people that paved the way before me that did it with DMX, that did it with EL wire, that did it with other things. John Storms using his Mickey ears back in 2015 predates me, but in 2016, I was using it natively in X-Lights and using the Falcon Player. So that's what this presentation is focused on. So this is kind of a preview of what we're going to go through. So who am I? I'm an IT leader with over 25 years of experience. My first home PC was this little thing here. It's called a Commodore 64. Didn't come with a monitor. This is the whole thing right here. And you saved your programs on a cassette tape.
Yes.
Full counter, and that's how you knew where your program started, was based on the counter, and you had to keep this little sheet. So that was my first home PC. My first part-time IT job was a small computers administrator in the U.S. Air Force as an additional duty in 1989, where I was responsible for taking care of Burroughs word processors, if anybody knows what that is. Zenith 150 computers, to give you an idea how far back I go in the professional field. And then my first full-time job was actually as a COBOL programmer in 1998, which is kind of interesting because there's been a lot of headlines lately with COVID-19 about COBOL programmers being needed. As far as being an actual developer, I probably haven't touched the keyboard in about 12 or 13 years now, and I'm just in a leadership role helping others do the development. Other hobbies before we get into Pixel specifically include triathlons, 3D printing, woodworking, drone flying, other Raspberry Pi projects, robotics, RetroPie. So between my job, my 2 kids, my wife, I stay pretty busy along with the lighting hobby. I actually started in the lighting hobby with pixels first in 2013. I am not a former lore user. I never did a show with AC lights up until about 2011. I just put lights on my house like everybody else. In 2013, I built a house and I had a neighbor that lived nearby that did animated lights, and I learned from her. I actually put a picture here. This is, and I went back and found this just today. The first version of X-Lights that I was on was X-Lights Nutcracker version 3.2.14. And if you can kind of see in the background, that was even before the grid. So that was back when we were using more of what I call an Excel format of X-Lights Nutcracker. I'm the co-creator with my wife, Crystal, of Bentonville Heartlights. I'll get into more of that in another slide. But our display draws thousands of people each week. It's over an hour wait every night, and Fridays and Saturdays are over 2 hours to see our display, and we raise money for multiple sclerosis. Another note, I'm a hobbyist, I'm not a vendor. Everything I'm sharing tonight is free and readily available on forums and Facebook. I have nothing to sell, and all of this is do it yourself. So attempt it at your own risk, and you're not going to get any sales pitch from me tonight. You'll get some recommendations on things that I picked up along the way, but I don't have a lighting business. I prefer to keep my IT job and keep this as a hobby. Bentonville Heart Lights. This is our Facebook page over here. We do actually run all of, so this was our Easter, little Easter display we had. We have Halloween. We do St. Patrick's Day. We run lights on our house for most of the holidays during the darker months of the year in the United States. St. Patrick's Day, Valentine's Day, that type of thing. Originally, we were just our house by ourselves. We're now currently 2 houses. This is our house, and then across the street from us, our neighbor has joined in with an outline and a single snowflake. And then we have 2 ditto signs that are about 200 feet away from our house on either side of the road that kind of gives the traffic that's waiting something to look at. I say I'm co-creator with my wife. What we now call rainbow arches was her idea. We saw Matt Johnson's HDPE arch that he did, single arch, and my wife said, well, what if we could inset them into each other and have like multiples in one arch? And so she comes up with the ideas and I got to work, and so that's how we came up with one of our unique things being the rainbow arch. The advantage we have with our display is we have an island that sits between my neighbor's house and my house. So we also have, and we have a parking lot behind our neighborhood. So people can come and walk and actually sit on the island and watch the display at night, which gives us a little bit extra traffic and relieves some of the wait time. And then for some reason, I put a daytime picture of our display and our donation box. My first mobile props, again, X lights, Falcon player, focus, not taking away from anybody else that's done anything else, but at the 2016 Christmas Expo in Chicago, Illinois, I was walking around with my see-through backpack that had a string of 50 pixels, a 15-meter light strip hooked up directly to a Raspberry Pi. You can even see this is back when we had to have the USB to hold our sequences, and a battery pack, as well as a 2x2 P10 panel. If you look closely, you can see a BeagleBone Black sitting here with an octa-scroller, and the battery is somewhere on there. Sorry, the picture is a little small. Kind of a caveat, like most things in this hobby, there's more than one way to do mobile props. I'm just going to share with you how I do them and a couple of options. If you find other ways, great. Try it out. Does not bother me at all. I got to thinking afterwards, here's the actual links if you want to go see my originals from back in 2016. So what is a mobile prop? Actually, it's anything you want it to be, really. You can add pixels to a tie. You can add pixels to a Santa hat. You can, a few years ago, people started making these hats that people wear. Here's a costume that I made back in 2016 that was kind of called an Elvis costume, where I had pixels going down the front and on the bottom of the legs of a pair of pants. You can make necklaces. I've made my wife a Mickey Mouse necklace. I have a snowman necklace that we can wear when we're outside. There's commercial versions where you can do a whole outfit that you can do with pixels just the same. You can do it with cars. If you really want to, if you've got the money that you want to do it, you can take pixel strip. It's kind of hard to see here. That's pixel strip here that's put on this car, and they just create patterns. You can do that same type of thing with X lights, with Falcon Player, with what I'm about to show you tonight. And then we've also done parade floats. A lot of people like to show off X lights. This happened to be my church. It was a float, the neighborhood church, DNC. We had a big star, and then we had streamers of pixels running off of it, and we're able to create some pretty neat effects. And this is a stable that we were pulling along behind us on casters, and then I just had the controller sitting inside of there. And the Green Lantern. I'll just leave that alone for right now. There'll be more on that later. You'll understand why I have the Green Lantern. So why have a mobile prop? There's a bunch of different reasons. One is visibility. If you're somebody that likes to get out and interact with the folks that come to see your display, having something that lights up, makes you safe. Having it sync with your display, that's kind of a bonus. That generates more conversation. You can have some fun with it. I have a pair of old wireframe penguins that I've converted to pixels that are battery operated that I move throughout the season that gives the kids something to look for. We have repeat visitors that come by and see our display, and so the kids love to figure out where I've put the penguins in the neighborhood that are synchronized with the rest of the display. Sporting and entertainment events, you can stand out from the crowd, off the old offense and defense type of thing. If you light it up, granted, daytime football games, that type of stuff, it doesn't work, but there's a lot of nighttime stuff that you can do it. Now, a lot of entertainers are starting to do more with the crowd interaction, but you can do it on your own and have something that makes you stand out. Parties. My wife and I have worn the hats, and she's got a tiara that we wear to parties. Community events. You can promote your display, your church, your civic organization through parades, glow runs. There's any number of things you can do. You can put stuff on your desk at work during different holidays. So a mobile prop is just another way to add another dimension to the lighting hobby, in my opinion. So let's get into the meat of how to make a mobile prop. We'll go into design and lights. We'll go into power. We'll go into light control. We'll go into some example wiring diagrams. I'll take you from start to finish on creating a mobile prop. And we'll get into user control as far as network and access. So design. You can use an existing core prop and make it mobile. You can design your own concept. You can use a 3D printer if you've got one, and you can create your own idea. This one here that I have display, when you put the cone, when I print it in clear filament and put it over the top of this, I have a little miniature Christmas tree. And my wife was also quick to point out that it looks like a wedding cake topper. Wood, metal, aluminum, whatever. The only limit is your mind. Here's an example from James Hohensi of Boscoyo Studio. He created this great big guitar, and we made it mobile, and we made the hat actually synchronized with the guitar. And part of the creativity that went into it was James said, hey, why don't we use my Mega Tree strip as the actual strap on the guitar to make it easier to hold it, and then white zip ties at the ends where it would be normally the end of the strings on the guitar. We use white zip ties to make fake ends. There is no limit to what you can make in this hobby, whether it's mobile props or static props in your yard. So be creative. Hint for wearables. Originally, when I first started doing this, I was just trying to cut little holes and stick the various forms of pixels through clothing if I needed it to be seen easier. Go out on Amazon and spend $15 on a set of hole punches, and you make much cleaner holes. The hats that I make like this now, I'm actually going to go back for a second here. This hat here actually has an additional ring of individual pixels that adds another element to it, as well as some stuff on top. Having hole punches has made it so much easier for doing that type of stuff with wearables. So design, there's no limit. Lights. So this was fun pulling. I might have a small addiction with pixels and different types of pixels. So the lights don't really matter. The only thing I will say, I'll read this first, is use WS281X or WS2811, WS2812, 12Bs, 15s, something that's a 3-wire protocol for your mobile props. It just makes it easier for what I'm about to show you. The older WS2801 4-wire, clock wire pixels don't really work because the smaller controller that you want to use isn't able to handle 4-wire control. So that's why I've got this no down here, even though I've got it listed. So let's zoom in for a second, and I'm going to actually step you through the actual list of pixels, because maybe some of you haven't seen some of these different types of pixels. So number one is your basic bullet pixel, right? White wire, over here, black wire over here. Number 2 is the square pixels that most of us are familiar with. Number 3 is the strip. And I apologize that I only gave one example of strip. There is different densities of strip if you're not aware. I've got some that are 144 pixels per meter. This is the standard 60 pixels per meter. So there's different density if you want to use strip. Number 4, down here in the bottom, this is the old WS2801 square modules. Now you can get the WS2812B squares that look something like this, rectangles, squares, whatever you want to call them. Number 5, this is actually 5mm pixels that you can get now. So instead of the larger 12mm, these are 5mm bullet pixels that you can get. These right here, these little ones, you can't hardly see it. Right there, right there, right there, right there, right there. Those are actually pixels. That's a pixel right there. These are called fairy lights. Yes, I know fairy lights were used for a previous version of lighting, but the newest fairy lights are these WS2812 that are really, really super small. I've also seen some people call this new form factor fairy lights. It doesn't matter to me, call them what you want. Up here, number 7, these are modules. I call these modules. These are the standard 3-pixel on a plastic mold, if you will, modules. Number 8 here is what are called strobe pixels. As far as I know, I'm one of the few that use these. You're welcome to look into them. These are basically, this is a strobe rather than being a standard RGB LED. This only responds to red and white, and it just strobes a white color. It's white only. These are strobe pixels that you can use. Panels, P10s and P5s. If you've done very much with panels, you probably know P10s are what we started with. A lot more people are transitioning to the P5s now that they're coming down in price. And then, of course, there's the flexible panel. This is actually a higher density 11 by 44 that I found this spring that I've started using on my hats. And this is that same hat that actually has these fairy light pixels right here. And like I said, I used a hole punch to create individual holes around the hat. And then I just have it show the individual pixel showing there. So that's the panels. And then there's different forms of rings that you can find all over the place in all different sizes. You can use rings. And then the newest thing that I found that I've really enjoyed is number 11 down here. These are individual raw chip lights. Those are WS2812 B chip and all 3 LEDs, the red, green, and blue on a little bitty chip. And if you look, they actually look the same as what you see on some of these other things. But these are the individual chips. There was actually a video that was going around, I want to say it's a few weeks ago, where a gentleman made a ball of these chips, and he kind of walks you through how he did it. And those chips are actually WS2812, and you can buy them in a roll of 1,000 from China. And with those, there is no limit to what you can make. They're not waterproof, but there's multiple ways you can waterproof them. So lights for mobile props, again, your imagination is the only limitation. Well, let's get into power. Back up for a second. Everything in this picture is 5 volt, except for these up here. These are only done in 12 volt. But a lot of these form factors are available in both 5 volt and 12 volt. There's only a few exceptions where you can't find both. Panels, for example, are 5 volt. But a lot of these come in either form factor, either power factor, whichever you prefer. For the most part, I use cell phone battery backups, 5 volts. I am mostly a majority 5 volt display. Most of my props and my pixels are all 5 volt. The nice thing about the cell phone battery backups, there's lots of sizes and lots of price points. This little bitty one here, right here, I think is $6 at your local Walmart. And they go up as high as I think I spent $55 for this great big one here. I will tell you to watch out for battery packs with a timeout. This one right here, I don't actually use anymore because I bought it thinking it would be great because it had a little power button and stuff, not realizing that it actually timed out. So if it didn't recognize enough amperage, voltage, whichever it is going through it, then it actually went to sleep. 12 volt, for those of you that want a 12 volt power supply. Here's a suggestion. Here's something I've done. 8 AA batteries equals 12 volts, and you can get an 8 AA battery holder. The only thing is your props won't run as much time on AA batteries. I think there are some other like RC car batteries and stuff that are at 12 volts, but I'm not as familiar with 12 volts, to be quite honest. But there is a way you can do 12 volts, and I'll share more about voltage on the next slide. Another way to do 12 volts is a car battery or a boat battery. A little caveat there, running vehicles electric system is more like 14 or 15 volts. So a car battery or boat battery in the vehicle should be used with some kind of voltage stabilizer. I'll talk more about that in the next slide. If you're gonna use a 12 volt vehicle battery by itself, so not actually attached, not part of a running mechanical electrical system, then I highly suggest that you get a deep cycle marine battery. They're actually designed for holding a charge and releasing a charge much better than a regular car battery is. Let's say you want 110 volt and it is you know, it's a parade float, or it's something you want to put lights on your car, like Sammy's lights on wheels. One of the ways you can do that is just go buy a simple inverter, plug it into your cigarette lighter, and it'll convert the car's voltage into 110 volt for you. And most of them have little USB ports as well for powering things like a Raspberry Pi or whatever. That's one way to get 110 volts. If you're really, really adamant about having 110 volts because you want to run off of mains, and I apologize to those folks who don't, where 110 volt is not mains. I realize there may be some people from other countries. This presentation was designed from a US-centric basis, and I apologize. But anyway, what you can do, worst case scenario, is get a generator, put it on a furniture dolly, tie a rope to the furniture dolly, plug in your normal, you know, your normal CG 1500 box that has your controller and your power supplies with all your dongles off of it, and drag that puppy behind you. Or put it in the back of a pickup truck and run things that way. You can do that. So power, again, multiple options, no limitations, just your mind, really. So I've talked about 5 volt and 12 volt, but I didn't really say, you know, anything one way or the other, except for the fact that I tend to mainly work with 5 volts. To be quite honest, when it comes to mobile props, I don't care which you use for pixels or power. I don't. This is not one of those places where we're going to have the 5 volt versus 12 volt. And here's why. Because of buck and boost. This is my friend Buck. This is my friend Boost. Buck is a buck converter. It steps down DC power, bringing your 12 volts to 5 volts, or whatever voltage to whatever voltage. And a boost converter steps up DC power, bringing your 5 volts or whatever it is to 12 volts. Take any power supply, take any pixels. If I have a buck converter, I have boost converters, I can make them work for a mobile prop. The only limitation is that each converter can only handle about 3 amps, but you can buy a 10-pack of them for $10 to $20, depending on if it's the buck or the boost, on Amazon. I tend to run all of my mobile stuff across 5 volt, but that's just because pretty much everything I have is 5 volt. But if you run 5 volt, you don't have to worry about buck or boost, and everything's running on the same voltage. But if you want to run different voltages, great, go for it. Use buck and boost. And oh, by the way, you can use buck and boost in your home displays. Even though I'm majority 5 volt, my floodlights are actually 24 volt. And I do have some 12 volt props. And I just happen to use the buck converters to drop the 24 volts down to 12 volts for my 12 volt items. I also have house lights. The numbers on my house are actually a prop. They're lit up, and those are used with the 12 volt modules. I use a boost converter from my 5-volt power supply to bring it up to 12 volts for my lighted house numbers. So something that can help you with mobile props or help you with your static display in your home. So usually the next question that comes up is how many amps, watts, etc. I'm just going to I wrote this out and I'm just going to kind of read it. This is part of the hobby, to be honest, I'm just not that into. I'm not an electrical engineer. I never do the math to see how much power is needed or any of that. Yes, I estimate for my static home display, but even then, I just use round estimates. I know that my 5-volt power supply, when I'm running at somewhere around 30 to 40% brightness, I know I can run about 1,500 pixels off it. And that's giving me plenty of headroom. That round number is the same thing that I do with mobile props. What I do is I just build stuff and I try it out. I know some people want to have all the answers before they try something, but this is low voltage stuff. When I was a child, I stuck my tongue on a 9-volt battery more than once. Except for the fact where you're messing with mains, which the first thing we usually do with power mains is convert it to low voltage. I'm sorry, maybe I'm have the wrong aspect, but I just don't worry about it. Have I ruined something along the way? Yeah. And let me define ruin. So something didn't light up the way I wanted it and I had to add more power, or maybe it had too much power and yeah, maybe I accidentally did 12 volt to something that was supposed to be 5 volt. I always buy extras of everything in this hobby anyway. One of the early rules of thumb that I was taught was buy 10% extra of anything you buy. By doing that, it helps with the oops, the uh-ohs. If you actually need that side of things with the watts and the amps and all of that, I'd suggest checking with Bill Porter, who is very active in the hobby and is an electrical engineer and can absolutely give you those kind of numbers and help you with that kind of stuff, or find somebody else who's truly qualified in electrical engineering. As I stated earlier, I'm a hobbyist and just include my potential errors as an expense of the hobby. If I want a prop to run on a battery power for 8 hours, then I set it near me, or I check on it occasionally, go out every hour or two and look at it. If it fails early, I get a bigger battery. If it runs 30 to 50% longer than I need, then I figure I'm good. And let's be honest, I also carry backup batteries with me when it's critical to keep the blinky fascia going. If I'm doing a parade float, A, I'm going to do a lot of testing before I actually do the parade float. But B, I'm going to have backup batteries with me for worst case scenarios. So I apologize, but I'm not going to get into the amps and the volts and the Ohm's law and all of that. Just not something that does it for me in the hobby. Nothing against anybody else that does. All right, so let's get into light control. What kind of controller do you need? Well, here's another picture of me pulling a bunch of stuff together. I'll start here that my preferred one is the Raspberry Pi Zero, which is all the red rectangles you see in the picture. It's cheap, it's small, they're $5 at Micro Center if you buy them one at a time, but you can go in multiple times during the day. You can take your friends with you. I don't live near a Micro Center either. I get to Kansas City maybe a couple times a year. And what I do is me and some of my friends, we go in multiple times a day for the 3 days I'm in that weekend. And I'll pick up, 20 at a pop on a weekend that I'm in Kansas City. Yes, if you buy more than one, they cost more than $5, but you can buy them individually. There's ways around it. It gives you 2 ports, each capable of 600 plus pixels at 40 frames per second or 25 milliseconds. But to be honest, at $5 a piece, you don't really need to max one out. You don't need to run 1200 pixels. The hat that I showed you earlier that has the panels and the extra pixels, that hat does have 1100 pixels on it running off of one Raspberry Pi Zero W and one battery pack. The other reason I like the Raspberry Pi Zero W is it just works out of the box with X-Lights and Falcon Player. There's just not any additional setup. And there's some other options, and I'm going to kind of zoom in like I did earlier and kind of make it a little bit easier. So we talked about the Raspberry Pi Zero Ws. That's what all of these are. This is inside of a packet. This is outside of a packet. Maybe you want to run with a Raspberry Pi that has a Pi hat here, or a panel hat. This is Ron's Holiday Lights. He has 3 outputs, so you can run, I believe it's 12 P10 panels. I'm not sure how many P5 panels off of that. If you want just to run directly off the GPIOs, you can take, here's a Raspberry Pi. I believe that's a 3A, I'm not sure. This is a 4. Here's a BeagleBone Black with an octo scroller. Yes, you can run this off of a battery, and you can run the panels off of a battery. Looking at number 2, this is my newest favorite controller. I'm going to give Dan Culp a little bit of a plug here. I'll back up for just a second so you guys can kind of see. You look at the size of these different things. This number 2 in comparison to some of these other controllers, it's barely bigger than a Raspberry Pi. That is Dan's F8 PB. That's 8 port outputs, just like you'd find on a Falcon, along with 3 DMX, along with a display, along with push buttons, in this little bitty form factor, running a BeagleBone, what's called a pocket Beagle. So it has a whole lot of processing power. I love the size and simplicity of this. The other reason I love it is this is, again, truly native. You only have to set up your Falcon player, and you only have to set up X-Lights. There's nothing additional. Nothing against Falcon, but Falcon, you've got to set up the controller, then set up the Falcon player, then set up X-Lights. And I know some of that's changed, and I'll touch on that in a few minutes. That's number 2. Number 3 down here is the ES Pixel Stick. There's now an Art Stick. You can use these if you want. The only caveat to this is you still need some kind of controller, because while this will actually control the pixels, it doesn't have the horsepower itself to keep the sequences. It doesn't have anything to retain the sequences and run, so it's not self-contained with an ES Pixel Stick. And of course, number 4, what a lot of people use is Falcon. Now these are olders. This is an original F16 V2. Didn't even have the OLED back then. I still keep that around just for the fun of it. And this is what the F4s used to look like. I've been in the hobby too long, and I'm not into the F48s and all of that, so I apologize. That was not included in my picture. But any of these will work. Any of these can run off batteries if you configure it right. So any controller you have, again, the only limitation really is your mind for a mobile prop. So let's, again, going back to the fact that Raspberry Pi Zero W is my preferred method, I'm going to walk you through how to do a Raspberry Pi Zero W. So having a standard 3-wire pixel and having 2 ports of capacity, how would you do that on a Raspberry Pi Zero W? Well, using JST connectors or whatever preferred connection method, you can solder leads to the 5-volt ground and GPIO 18 for data output 1 and GPIO 19 for data output 2 to give you your 2 different ports. This is a pinout diagram. Guess since I'm zooming in, I'll zoom in again to make it where you can see it. So you've got 5-volt power here, 5-volt power here. You've got a ground here, and this would be port 1, GPIO 18. And down here on the other side, you've got GPIO 19 and a ground. So you could run 2 sets of 3-wire pixels, red being power, green being data, and blue being ground. So start off, here's our little Raspberry Pi. Here's 2 really long JSTs. Set it up in my clamps. I'm over 50, so I need my magnifying glasses to get it all to work. Solder it together. When you get done, here's 2 leads. And just like that diagram of the pinouts, red, red, blue, a couple of spaces and a green. And down here, a green and a blue. And voila, we have a controller, 2 JST connectors that we could plug in. There is a Raspberry Pi Zero WH, which has a header already soldered on so that you could just use breadboard connectors if you want. It retails for $10. That's an option for you if you want to consider using the WH versus just using the W and soldering on your leads. This is a more advanced wiring diagram. Why? Well, like that hat that I told you about earlier that has 1100 pixels on it, I cannot run just the straight 3-wire power through the Raspberry Pi and be able to light up all of the pixels on that hat. Power coming off of a Raspberry Pi, depending on which documentation you look at, is about 50 milliamps. 50 milliamps, again, I'm not going to get into the math, but 2 ports of 50 milliamps is not going to run 1100 pixels. So what you can do is you can run just the ground and just the data to one set of lights, and just the ground and just the data for another set of lights. Let's pretend each of these strings are 500. So that gets you your ground and your data. So you've got pixel information data going to your pixels. Then from your battery backup, your cell phone charger, from one port, you can directly power the Pi, and you can split off the other power and send it directly to your 500 pixels. What's coming out of these is usually somewhere around 2 to 2.5 amps, depending on what kind of battery backup you get. 2 to 2.5 amps is going to power a lot more pixels than 50 milliamps. Well, if you try to come off the Raspberry Pi, you can do the same thing with the other power. You can have it go just to the pixels. This is a more advanced diagram, but there is a way to do. So if you start deciding to play with this and you try to run off the power that's on the Raspberry Pi and you start running 200 pixels and you have problems, go reference this diagram and take your power directly from the power supply rather than taking it from the Raspberry Pi. The other thing I will say that I haven't said up to this point, again, this is all low voltage stuff. This is not, I believe the term is regulated power. There's no extra protection, no chips. You may burn up a $5 Raspberry Pi Zero W in this process. Okay, replace it. It's $5. I know some people are very particular about having regulated. That's why they get the Pi hat sitting on top of the Raspberry, and they do some extra steps. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you want to do, do it. I run by the skin of my teeth, and it has worked for me for the years that I've been doing it. And just FYI, some people have heard me say in some other places, double two-wire diagram. This is actually what I run for my home. I do not run power through my controllers on my home display. My power comes all directly from my power supplies. The only thing my controllers do is give me data and ground. This is the same method that Gil Jones uses as well. It's just a different way of doing things if you want to consider it. So we've created our Raspberry Pi W with 2 leads. So we need to take a micro USB cable from our battery backup and give it to our Raspberry Pi. Again, this is a simple diagram, and we need to connect our prop to our Raspberry Pi Zero W. And there's not a whole lot to it. That's all there is to it. And then if I had another prop, I could plug it in right here. This is a standard cable, nothing special. All right, so we're hooked up. Well, most of you know how to access FPP or your props when you're at home, but what do you do when you're away from home? Well, what I do is I have a Hutu travel router. It's N300, and actually Hutu's now actually been bought out by RavPower, so it's RavPower. They're $23 on Amazon. And what I do with this little thing is it creates a network for you, and I have it set up to have the exact SSID and password as my home network. So if I'm at a parade, I can still log on with my phone or whatever laptop, and it's just like I'm on my home network. It also makes it easy because all of my mobile props, my Raspberry Pi Zero, when it's at home, it's on my home network. When it's away from my home, it still thinks and looks and acts like it's on my home network. If I need an internet connection, then I turn on my cell phone hotspot, and the Hutu can actually bridge a cell phone internet connection for you. while still maintaining that same home network SSID. This is also another item that runs off of 5 volts. So again, I just run it off a cell phone battery again. I will actually zoom in for you. This is a standard box that I just kind of keep around. This is my standard portable box. Whenever somebody says I want to go do a parade float or something, I have my 2 power supplies for my pixels that run power directly to my pixels with regular pigtails. And then I've got another littler, smaller battery backup that runs the Hutu router and the Pi, because again, the Pi and the Hutu can run off of that one by themselves. And the Pi is just providing data and ground for my pixels. And this box I just keep around. The reason that I do use the Pi with the Pi hat in this particular case is because it is easy to disconnect and connect directly from the controller versus using the JST connectors. Thought I'd zoom in and give you a little bit of extra on that one. Okay, so you don't want to go out and get a Hutu. That's fine. I get that, or some other travel router. Falcon Player does broadcast a hotspot if it doesn't recognize the network. And usually the SSID is FPP with the password of Christmas. If you haven't changed it from the defaults, there's tethering SSID and tethering pre-shared key right there. You can log your phone, tablet, laptop onto this network to control your FPP and props when you're somewhere that doesn't have a network that you recognize. Works great. I've used it a lot. Lastly, let's say you don't really care about access that much. Well, guess what? You can just set up a playlist on your Falcon Player to run from 0 hours to 2400 hours, so basically 24 hours a day, so that every time power is applied to the Raspberry Pi, the playlist starts playing. This is a great option for office Christmas props that I only want running when I'm sitting there, but don't care about having control. Go back to my 3D printed trees that are sitting on my desk around Christmas time. I plug them into my battery backup when I walk into the office in the morning, and I unplug them when I walk away in the evening, and they just run, and they don't care about a network, and because my playlist is just set to run every time there's power to it. So that's another way to do your mobile props. If you don't care about network or having access once you've got them all set up at home, then just set up your schedule to run 24 hours a day. You apply power at whatever location with your mobile prop, and they will run your selected sequence. Falcon Player. How do you actually set up the pixels on the Falcon Player? I put setup old way. I'll go ahead and read the caveat down here. There may be an easier way to do this now directly in xLights. Admittedly, I have not kept up with all the upload and configuration changes in xLights. The old way still works fine for me. I am on the latest version of xLights. I am using 2020.16, but I don't use any of the automatic uploading. And there's just, I don't know, I guess I'm just an old crusty. When you get used to doing it a certain way and it works for you, you just continue to do it that way. So for me, what I do is I go into input and output setup, and that's a drop down, and it'll give me channel options. And then I go to the Pi Pixel Strings tab, and you leave this new type as RPI WS281X, and you just click on this Add Output. And what it'll do is it'll give you 2 rows. And that first row matches with that GPIO 18, and the next one matches with GPIO 19. And you just put how many ever pixels you have running on each of those ports, and that's pretty much how you set it up. Fairly simple. If you're running something like the F8PB, as soon as you go into Falcon Player, it'll already have that stuff laid out for you. So on to the next one. All right, so we've hooked this thing up. This is where we were at. I know it says we have light, but walk through this with me a minute. If you go to status control, there will be a drop down, and if you click on display text testing and click on this enable test mode. I guess I could have read it down here, sorry. Voila, you'll have lights. Without doing anything else, it will immediately light up any pixels that are associated with it if they have the power of the dot on the ground that they're supposed to. And then you can see I picked it up off the floor. And of course, green lantern, I changed all the pixels to green. That's green lantern from the opening. Note, it's up to you how you hide the battery pack, the wires, and the Raspberry Pi. Some of my props are completely contained within the prop, and some I run a wire down my back, like the Mickey Mouse necklace or the Snowman necklace, and keep the battery /Pi in my pocket. Again, the only limitation is your imagination on what you do with the wires. Obviously, these are really long wires. I wouldn't normally run something this long if I was going to hide it inside of this lantern. But this lantern is a perfect example of something that when we're walking up and down the road, it makes us very visible. But at the same time, this particular lantern has 12 pixels in it, so there's things that I can do with it that make it synchronized to my house display. So that is a prop completely lit up for you. So some closing thoughts. What about multiple mobile props? Well, this is all well and good, but I want to create a special lighted sash for each of the Girl Scouts in my daughter's troop and have the sashes light up together when they are all selling Girl Scout cookies. I guess I could put at night. I assume during the daytime it may be hard to see your lighted sash. I don't know. I don't know how many pixels you're going to put on that lighted sash. There's a trend to a lot more light, so maybe some of the high density or whatever we're calling them props are visible in the daytime. No problem. Give each sash its own Raspberry Pi and battery pack. Set one Raspberry Pi to be the master and the other Raspberry Pi to be remotes. And it really doesn't matter which is which, and FPP will keep them synced up as the sequence play as long as they're all on the same network. I apologize that I didn't include that. Obviously, they have to have some way to talk to each other. They can't all be independent. In this presentation, I didn't hardly mention X-Lights. There's no magics, there's no special sauce, no special settings in X-Light for a mobile prop versus a prop tethered to your ground or your house. You build a model, a custom model, a model that you download from a vendor. You sequence some effects, you save the sequence, you load it to the controller just like you would for the rest of your display. There's only one large caveat to mobile props if you're using them with an existing stationary display. Remember that your mobile prop is always moving, so it won't be in one static location in your yard or on your house. Realize what that means if you have it in your whole house group and you're standing on the right side of your display at one point and the left side of your display at the same point in the psalm, but later in the evening. You may stand out unexpectedly. Let me summarize that a little bit. Use very generic colors and effects on a mobile prop that you're going to use with your house display. Something that don't put it in whole house or group or all or whatever we're calling it now, that where all of your props are. Just have it do colors that kind of match the other colors that are going on, and you'll be just fine. But obviously it's an item that moves, and so you can't sequence it specifically for where you're going to be standing, because the whole point of a mobile prop is that you're moving. If you're going to be standing in the same place all night, then just put it on the ground or put it on the house and just make it a static prop. Don't bother with all of this making it mobile. For some of you, you may be new and just starting out. You've heard me say Falcon Player a few times, and you may not know what Falcon Player is. That's okay. There's a forum out there, falconchristmas.com. There's a Facebook group, facebook.com/group/Falcon Player, where you can find more information. And there's a lot of folks in the hobby that are familiar that can help you get started. I would tell you from the first time that I actually had to have Chris Pinkham set up Falcon Player for me in 2015 on a Pi because I couldn't figure it out. What we had to do back then versus what you have to do now to get Falcon Player running is night and day, and it's pretty easy. For wearables, for wearables specifically with mobile props, consider movement. And this time I don't mean movement within your display. I mean movement of you as a human. If you are wearing something on your body and you're going to be moving your arms, think of the Elvis costume that I showed earlier. Wires like to break if they're bent a lot. Strip is notorious for failing if flexed too much. Think about your wearables kind of like a car. If there's going to be too much movement of the wires or the lights in the prop, you'll probably need to do regular maintenance and repairs to keep them working well. There's ways to try to minimize that. Bill did a great job last year of showing an example of where he took strip and put it in almost kind of a hardened case that was still on the body, but it kept the wires and the strip itself from moving at all. Just be aware of that fact for things that you're going to wear. The hats on our head aren't really a big deal, but it's more clothing type of items. What about xSchedule and Jukebox? Can you have a mobile prop but still use xSchedule, a full-blown PC? If you have access to 110 volt power, again, this was designed for the US, remember the generator on a furniture dolly, then yes, you can figure out how to do the whole thing without FPP and just use xSchedule and Jukebox. There is no limitation. If you want to do it, it can be done. There's more advanced options that I haven't covered on this. You can add push buttons to your Pi and start a sequence with the push of a button. You can have those buttons on your prop or in your pocket. One of the things I want to add to one of the hats that I'm currently working on is have some push buttons on the back brim of the hat that I can just reach my hand up and push a button and it'll start a different sequence on my hat. So there's more advanced things that haven't been covered in this display. There's also, kind of alluded to it at the beginning of it, there's people doing a lot of other things versus just what I've covered. I think this topic was kind of brought up because it's a general topic that everybody using just basic X lights and Falcon Player can do. But if you want to see more advanced stuff, there's other people doing. I know John Storms usually is working on something on the side. Jerry Jewell, if you're familiar with him, he's another one that I see doing all kinds of stuff. He's had motorized Christmas trees and all kinds of stuff. There's, again, multiple ways to do it and multiple people doing it. I'm just honored to have the option to share the way I do it. With that, that is my presentation.
Okay, so if there are any questions for Mark, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
I do see the question in the Zoom group chat that says, what milliamp minimum? I apologize, I go back to my slide about math. I don't know. I mean, I know off the top of my head, a Raspberry Pi Zero W is 150 milliamps. So take a power supply and take the rating and divide it by the 150 milliamps plus how many pixels you're going to be running, and you can roughly get how many hours. So I do kind of know what the rough math is, but I don't know the exact answer. Another question is there an advantage to using a Pi over an Arduino or an ESP8266 board? For me, the advantage is that I've grown up with X lights, and so I know how to sequence with X lights. I don't know how to sequence with Arduino or ESP8266 boards. I do think the ESP8266, if it's what I'm thinking, is the same as the ES Pixel stick. And again, I know with that one, while it can receive pixel data and light up the lights, it can't actually hold it. The Raspberry Pi, the nice thing about it is it's an all-in-one package. Everything that you need is right there in the Raspberry Pi, and you don't have to have anything extra. I don't know about the Arduino. I've never played with Arduino, so I would have to defer to somebody else. Do you have a link to all the different LED options that you showed? Fairy lights, circles, single LEDs. A majority of what I showed was from Ray Wu at AliExpress. The only thing that wasn't from Ray Wu was some of the items were from BTRF lighting on AliExpress. That's Bravo, Tango, Romeo, Foxtrot lighting. The fairy lights are from them. The squares that I make my snowman necklace with from them. But pretty much everything is from Ray Wu. I've been a customer of Ray since 2014, and usually if he doesn't have it on his site, he can make it. I think the apples and oranges comment is probably the Arduino response to our Arduino and Raspberry Pi. Can you show how you set up the GPIO and FTP again? Yeah, absolutely. I don't mind going back to any slide. And some people see this slide and they think, well, where did you get this information? In Falcon Player, if you're on a screen, it's very old-fashioned. Hit F1 for help, and literally Falcon Player will bring up a help screen, and that's where I first learned about how to do a mobile prop and figured out the pins, was because Chris has documented in his help files how to hook up pixels directly to the pins of a GPIO. I think also this presentation is being recorded. And Ed, I don't know what the protocol is, but I'd be more willing to share the actual PowerPoint presentation as a PDF.
Yes, not a problem.
In the various groups that we advertise this xSlides. So,
can I ask a question? So, if it's pin 18, why is the number 12? I guess they're not numbered in sequential order.
Well, okay, so it's GPIO 18. It's pin 12. These pin numbers, I was referencing the GPIO numbers.
Okay.
So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are the pins. It's pin 12 and pin 35. But it's GPIO. See this label, GPIO 18? Yes,
okay.
Those are not labeled in the same order as the pins. Commodore 64 rules. Thank you. I still have cassette tapes that have what the counter number was for where a particular program started.
Okay, so are there any final questions for Mark?
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, this is Frank Retzlaff.
Hey, Frank.
Can I ask a quick question to Mark?
Yes, sir. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, I've met you, Mark, in Mesquite at the Dallas Expo a few years ago. You probably won't remember me, but I sure remember you. I'm trying to build a graduation hat for a nephew. I've got a year to figure this out, but it looks like it could be a problem. I'm trying to put the flexible panels on the top of a graduation hat, and they're not quite the same size. I bought a pair. They're a little bigger than what I need. Have you ever thought of, is there any way to cut those down? Or am I kind of better start thinking of another method to do this?
Yeah, I would not cut those down, because usually those are the way the PCBs are wired that are actually holding the pixels. If you try to cut a row off, then you're actually going to basically orphan. You'll have one row that'll work, and you'll orphan all the other rows.
Yeah.
In my knowledge, either that or like somebody just put in the chat, you could put black tape over the pixels you don't want to use. And then in xLights, you may be able to do like an individual start channel and actually tell it not to even light up those pixels. But yeah, you're definitely getting into something that's more advanced to try to figure out.
You got another suggestion on what other lights maybe could I put on the top of it's just a flat, I think it's only like a 9-inch square, the top of a graduation hat. What else might work up there?
Part of it depends on how much work you want to put into it, right? So, I mean, you could literally buy these and wire it up yourself, these number 11s. They're not as pretty, but there's these here that have come out that lay absolutely flat. They're actually the same thing as what I use in the top of this hat. These lay really flat, and Raywu has these here. I don't remember exactly what they're called, but you've got silver and red wire that's sitting on top. Otherwise, what you could do, depending on how you want to do it, is you could buy these. These actually will inset into themselves, so I separated them out, but this square will go in this square will go in this one, and this little 2 one will go inside of this one. And you could maybe put a group of these on the top of the hat, and those may fit, because you can use different sizes, you may be able to get the dimensions that you want for the graduation hat. That would be my other suggestion. Would probably be something like this.
All right. I appreciate it. I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
And they actually make multiple sizes of those flexible panels.
They do.
Yeah.
How do you splice USB cable to supply power? I literally just cut them open and strip it off to the bare wire, and then wire them back together. I literally, so when I'm coming off of here, this is literally a USB connector that I just cut the wire and I find the black and the red. And in this case, where the red is going to go to the Raspberry Pi, then I have one red wire that goes to my micro USB for my Raspberry Pi power, and another red wire that goes over here to my Pixels. I literally, I'm not afraid to cut wires, open things up, and make the wires that I need. Again, this is all very DIY. It's not, I apologize. It's not, you get this T connector or pigtail or whatever. So somebody said for the graduation hat, get a bigger hat. I like that. Or
That's
put the top of the hat and tell them to stand really, really still.
Jokesters of the group. Okay, any final questions for Mark?
I just want to say thanks, Mark. We do a parade float, and I just got tons of ideas and ways to rewire things.
Great. Well, I'm glad you can use the information. I'm happy to share.
Thanks.
Great. Okay, thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it. We're going to now go into the announcement portion of the call.